Elon Musk, Chapter 2, A Mind of His Own, Pretoria, the 1970s. Lonely and determined. At 7:30 on the morning of June 28, 1971, Mae Musk gave birth to an 8-pound, 8-ounce boy with a very large head. At first, she and Errol were going to name him Nice, after the town in France where he was conceived. History may have been different, or at least amused, if the boy had to go through life with the name Nice Musk instead. In the hope of making the Halsmans happy, Earl agreed that the boy would have names from the side of the family. Elon, after Mae's grandfather, J. Elon Haldeman, and Reeve, the maiden name of Mae's maternal grandmother. Errol liked the name Elon because it was biblical, and he later claimed that he had been present. As a child, he says he heard about a science fiction book by the rocket scientist Werner von Braun called Project Mars, which describes a colony on the planet run by an executive known as the Elon. Elon cried a lot, ate a lot, and slept a little. At one point, Mae decided to just let him cry until he fell asleep, but she changed her mind after neighbors called the police. His mood switched rapidly when he wasn't crying. His mother says he was really sweet. Over the next 2 years, Mae had 2 more children, Kimball and Tosca. She didn't coddle them. They were allowed to roam freely. There was no nanny, just a housekeeper who paid little attention when Elon began experimenting with rockets and explosives. He says he's surprised he made it through childhood with all his fingers intact. When he was 3, his mother decided that because he was so intellectually curious, he should be in nursery school. The principal tried to dissuade her, pointing out that being younger than anyone else in the class would present social challenges. They would wait another year. I can't do that, Mae said. He needs someone besides me to talk to. I really have this genius child, she prevailed. It was a mistake. Elon had no friends, and by the time he was in 2nd grade, he was tuning out. The teacher would come up to me and yell at me, but I would not really see or hear her, he says. His parents got in to see the principal, who told them, "We have reason to believe that Elon is retarded. He spent most of his time in a trance, not listening," one of his teachers explained. "He looks out of the window all the time, and when I tell him to pay attention, he says, 'The leaves are turning brown now.'" Errol replied that Elon was right, the leaves were turning brown. The impasse was broken when his parents agreed that Elon's hearing should be tested, as if that might be the problem. They decided it was an ear problem, so they took out my anoids out, he says. That calmed the school officials down. But it did nothing to change his tendency to zone out and retreat into his own world when thinking. Ever since I was a kid, if I start to think about something hard, then all of my sensory systems turn off, he says. I can't see or hear of anything. I'm using my brain to commute, not for incoming information. The other kids would jump up and down and wave their arms in front of my face to see if they could summon back his attention. But it didn't work. It's best not to try to break through when he has that vacant stare, his mother says. Compounding his social problem was his unwillingness to suffer politely those he considered fools. He used the word stupid often. Once he started going to school, he became so lonely and sad, his mother says. Kimball and Tosca would make friends on the first day and bring them home. But Elon never brought friends home. He wanted to have friends, but he just didn't know how. As a result, he was very, very lonely, and that pain remained seared into his soul. When I was a child, that's one thing I said, he recalled in an interview with Rolling Stone. During a simultaneous period in his love life in 2017. I never want to be alone. That's what I would say. I still don't want to be alone. One day when he was 5, one of his cousins are having a birthday party, but Elon was punished for getting into a fight. And told to stay home. He was a very determined kid and decided to walk on his own to his cousin's house. The problem was that it was on the other side of Pretoria, a walk of almost 2 hours, Plus, he was too young to read the road signs. I kind of knew what the route looked like because I'd seen it from a car and I was determined to get there. So I just started walking, he says. He managed to arrive just as the party ended. When his mother saw him coming down the road, she freaked out. Fearing he would be punished again, he climbed a maple tree and refused to come down. Kimball remembers standing beneath the tree and staring at his older brother in awe. He has this fierce determination that blows your mind and was sometimes frightening and still is. When he was 8, and he used to focus on when he was 8, he focused his determination on getting a motorcycle. Yes, at age 8, he would stand next to his father's chair and make his case over and over. When his father picked up a newspaper and ordered him to be quiet, Elon would continue to stand there. It just was extraordinary to watch, Kimball says. He would stand there silently, then resume his argument. Then stand still, silent. This happened every evening for weeks. His father finally caved in and got Elon a blue and gold 50cc Yamaha. Elon had a tendency to be spacey and wander off on his own, oblivious to what others are doing. On a family trip to Liverpool to see some of the relatives when he was 8, his parents left him and his brother in a park to play by themselves. It was not in his nature to stay put, so he started wandering the streets. Some kid found me crying and took me to his mom, who gave me milk and biscuits and called the police, he recalls. When he was reunited with his parents at the police station, he was unaware that anything was amiss. It was insane to leave me and my brother alone in a park at that age, he says, but my parents weren't overprotective like parents are today. Years later, I watched him at a solar roof construction site with his 2-year-old boy, known as X. It was 10 p.m., and there were forklifts and other moving equipment lit by 2 spotlights that cast big shadows. Musk put X on the ground so the boy could explore on his own, which he did without fear. As he poked around amid the wires and cables, Musk glanced at him occasionally, but refrained from intervening. Finally, after X started to climb on a moving spotlight, Musk walked over and picked him up. X squirmed and squealed, unhappy about being restrained. Musk would later even joke about having Asperger's, a common name known for the form of autism spectrum disorder that can affect a person's social skills, relationships, emotional connectivity, and self-regulation. He was never actually diagnosed as a kid, his mother says, but he says he has Asperger's, and I'm sure he's right. The condition was exacerbated by his childhood traumas. Whenever he would later feel bullied or threatened, his close friend Antonio Gracia says the PTSD from his childhood would hijack his limbic system, the part of the brain that controls emotional responses. As a result, he was bad at picking up social cues. I took people literally when they said something, he says, and it was only by reading books when I began to learn that people did not always say what they really meant. He had a preference for things. They were more precise, such as engineering, physics, and coding. Like all psychological traits, Musk's were complex and individualized. He could be very emotional, especially about his own children, and he felt acutely the anxiety that comes from being alone. But he didn't have the emotional receptors that produce everyday kindness and warmth and desire to be liked. He was not wired to have empathy, or to be put in his less technical terms, he could be an asshole. The divorce. May and Errol Musk were at an Oktoberfest celebration with 3 other couples drinking beer and having fun when a guy at another table whistled at May and called her sexy. Errol was furious, but not at the guy. The way May remembers it, he lunged and was about to hit her, and a friend had to restrain him. She fled to her mother's house. Over time, he had gotten crazier, May later said. He would hit me when the kids were around. I remember that Elon, who was 5, would hit him back on the backs of his knees to try to stop him. Errol calls the accusations absolute rubbish. He claims he adored May, and over the years he tried to win her back. I've never laid a hand on a woman in my life, and certainly none of my wives, he said. That's one of the woman's weapons, is to cry that man abused her. to cry and to lie, and a man's weapons are to buy and to sign. On the morning after the Oktoberfest altercation, Errol came over to May's mother's house, apologized, and asked May to come back. "Don't you dare touch her again," Winfried Heldenman said. If you do it, she's coming to live with me." May said he never hit her after that, but his verbal abuse continued. He would tell her that she was boring, stupid, and ugly. The marriage never recovered. Errol later admitted, "It was my fault. I had a very pretty wife, but there was always prettier younger girls," he said. "I really loved May, but I screwed up." They divorced when Elon was 8. May and the children moved to a house on the coast near Durban, about 380 miles south of the Pretoria-Johannesburg area, where she juggled jobs as a model and dietitian. There was little money. She had bought her kids secondhand books and uniforms on some weekends and holidays, but usually not Tusk. The boys would take the train to see their father in Pretoria. He would send them back without any clothes or bags, so I had to buy them new clothes every time, she says. He said that I would eventually return to him, but I would be so poverty-stricken and wouldn't be able to feed them. Often she would have to travel on a modeling job or to give a nutrition lecture, leaving the kids at home. "I never felt guilty about working full-time because I didn't have a choice," she says. "My children had to be responsible for themselves. The freedom taught them to be self-reliant. When they faced a problem, she had a stock response. You'll figure it out." As Kimber recalls, "Mom wasn't soft and cuddly. She was always working, but that was a gift for us." Elon developed into a night person, staying up until dawn, reading books. When he saw his mother's light go on at 6 a.m., he would crawl into bed and fall asleep. That meant she had trouble getting him up in time for school, and on nights when she was away, he would sometimes not get to class until 10 a.m. After getting calls from the school, Errol launched a custody battle and had subpoenas issued for Elon's teachers. May's modeling agent and their neighbors, right before going to trial, Errol dropped the case. Every few years, he would initiate another court action and then drop it. When Tosca recounts these tales, she begins to cry. "I remember Mom just sitting there, sobbing on the couch. I didn't know what to do. All I could do was hold her." May and Errol were drawn to dramatic intensity rather than domestic bliss, a trait that would pass on. After her divorce, May began dating another abusive man. The children hated him and would occasionally put tiny firecrackers in his cigarettes that would explode when he lit up. Soon after the man proposed marriage, he got another woman pregnant. "She had been a friend of mine," May says. They were modeling together. Chapter 3. Life with Father. The move. At age 10, Musk made a fateful decision, one that he would later regret. He decided to move in with his father. He took the dangerous train overnight from Durban to Johannesburg on his own. When he spotted his father waiting for him at the station, he began beaming with delight, like the sun. Errol says, "Hi, Dad." "Let's get a hamburger," he shouted. That night he crawled into his father's bed and slept there. Why did he decide to move in with his father? Elon sighs and stays silent for almost a minute when I ask. "My dad was lonely, so lonely, and I felt I should keep him company," he finally says. "He used psychological wiles on me." He also adored his grandmother, Errol's mother, Cora, known as Nana. She convinced him that it was unfair that his mother had all 3 children and his father had none. In some ways, the move was not all that mysterious. Elon was 10, socially awkward, and had no friends. His mother was loving, but she was overworked, distracted, and vulnerable. His father, in contrast, was swaggering and mainly a big guy with large hands and a mesmerizing presence. His career had many ups and downs, but at that time he was feeling flush. He owned a gold-colored convertible Rolls-Royce Corniche, and more importantly, 2 sets of encyclopedias, lots of books, and a variety of engineering tools. So Elon, still a small boy, chose to live with him. It turned out to be a really bad idea, he says. I didn't yet know how horrible he was. 4 years later, Kimball followed. I didn't want to leave my brother alone with him, Kimball says. My dad guilted my brother into going to live with him, and then he guilted me. Why did he choose to go live with someone who inflicted pain? May Musk asked 40 years later. Why didn't he prefer a happy home? Then she paused for a moment. Maybe that's just who he is. After the boys moved in, they helped Errol build a lodge that he could rent to tourists in the Timvidi Game Reserve, a pristine stretch of a bush about 300 miles east of Pretoria. During construction, they slept around a fire at night with Browning rifles to protect them against lions. The bricks were made of river sand, and the roof was grass. As an engineer, Errol liked studying the properties of various materials, and he made the floors of mica because it was a good thermal insulator. Elephants in search of water often uprooted the pipes, and the monkeys regularly broke into the pavilions and pooped. So there was a lot of work for the boys to do. Elon often accompanied visitors on hunts. Although he had only a .22 caliber rifle, it had a good scope, and he became an expert shot. He even won a local skeet shooting contest, though he was too young to accept the prize of a case of whiskey. When Elon was 9, his father took him, Kimball, and Tosca on a trip to America, where they drove from New York through the Midwest and then down to Florida. Elon became hooked on the coin-operated video games he found in the motel lobbies. It was by far the most exciting thing, he said. We didn't have that yet in South Africa. Errol displayed the mix of flamboyance and frugality. He rented a Thunderbird, but they stayed in budget inns. When we got to Orlando, my father refused to take us to Disney World because it was too expensive, Musk recalls. I think we went to some water park instead. As it is often the case, Errol spins a different tale, insisting that they went both to Disney World, where Elon liked the haunted house ride, and Six Flags over Georgia. I told them over and over on the trip, America is where you will live someday. 2 years later, he took the 3 children to Hong Kong. My father had some combination of legitimate business and hookerism, Musk says. He left us in the hotel, which was pretty grudgy, and gave us $50 or something. We didn't see him for 2 days. They watched samurai movies and cartoons on the hotel TV, leaving Tosca behind. Elon and Kimball wandered the streets, going into electronic stores where they could play video games for free. Nowadays, someone would call the Child Protective Service if someone did what our dad did, Musk says. But for us back then, it was a wondrous experience. A confederacy of cousins. After Elon and Kimball moved in with their father in suburban Pretoria, May moved to nearby Johannesburg so the family could be closer together. On Friday, she would drive to Errol's house to pick up the boys. They would then go see their grandmother, the indomitable Winfred Haldeman, who cooked a chicken stew the kids hated so much that May would take them out for pizza afterward. Elon and Kimball usually spent the night at the house next door to their grandmother's house, where May's sister Kay Riv and her 3 boys lived. The 5 cousins, Elon and Kimball Musk, and Peter, Lyndon, and Russ Rive, became an adventurous and occasionally contentious bevy of bucks. May was more indulgent and less protective than her sister, so they would conspire with her and when plotting an adventure. If we wanted to do something like go to a concert in Johannesburg, she would say to her sister, I'm going to take them to church camp this evening, says Kimball. Then she would drop us off and we would go to do our mischief. Those trips would be dangerous. I remember once when the train stopped, there was an immense fight and we watched a guy get stabbed through the head, says Peter Riv. We were hiding inside the car when the doors closed, and we were like moving on. Sometimes a gang would board the train to hunt down rivals, rampaging through the cars, shooting machines. Some of the concerts were anti-apartheid protests, such as the one in 1985 in Johannesburg that drew 100,000 people. Often brawls would break out. We didn't try to hide from the violence. We often became survivors of it, says Kimball. It taught us to not be afraid, but also to not do crazy things. Elon developed a reputation for being the most fearless. When the cousins went to a movie and people were making noise, he would be the one to go over and tell them to be quiet, even if they were much bigger. It's a big theme for him to never have his decisions guided by fear, Peter recalls. This was definitely present even when he was a child. He was also the most competitive of the cousins. One time, when they were riding their bicycles from Pretoria to Johannesburg, Elon was out in front, pedaling fast, so the others pulled over, hitched a ride in the pickup. When Elon rejoined them, he was so angry that he started hitting them. It was a race, he said, and they had cheated. Such fights were common. Often they would happen in public, the boys oblivious to their surroundings. One of the many that Elon and Kimball had was at a county fair. They were wrestling and punching each other in the dust, Peter recalls. People were freaking out, and I had to stay to the crowd. This is not a big deal. These guys are brothers. Although the fights were usually over small things, they could get vicious. The way to win was to be the first person to punch or kick the other guy in the balls. Kimball says that would end the fight because you can't continue if you get crunched in the balls. The student. Musk was a good student, but not a superstar. When he was 9 and 10, he got A's in English and math. He is quick to grasp new mathematical concepts, his teacher noted. But there was a consistent refrain in the report card comments. He works extremely slow, either because he dreams or is doing what he should not. He seldom finishes anything. Next year he must concentrate on his work and not daydream during class. His compositions show a lively imagination, but he doesn't always finish in time. His average grade before he got to high school was 83 out of 100. After he was bullied and beaten in a public high school, his father moved him to a private academy, Pretoria Boys High School. Based on the English model, it features strict rules, canning compulsory chapel, and uniforms. There he got excellent grades in all but 2 subjects. Africans, he got a 61 out of 100 his final year, and religious instruction. Not extending himself, the teacher noted. I wasn't really going to put in a lot of effort into things I thought were meaningless, he says. I would rather be reading or playing video games. He got an A in physics, part of his senior certificate exams, but somewhat surprisingly, only a B in the math expert. In his spare time, he liked to make small rockets and experiment with different mixtures, such as a swimming pool chlorine and brake fluid, to see what would make the biggest bang. He also learned magic tricks and how to hypnotize people, once convincing Tosca that she was a dog and getting her to eat raw bacon. As they would later do in America, the cousins pursued various entrepreneurial ideas. One Easter, they made chocolate eggs, wrapped them in foil, and sold them door to door. Kimball came up with an ingenious scheme. Instead of selling them cheaper than the Easter eggs at the store, they made them more expensive. Some people would balk at the price, he says, but we told them, you're actually supporting future capitalists. Reading remained Musk's psychological retreat. Sometimes he would immerse himself in books all afternoon, and most of the 8-9 hour stretch out at a stretch. When the family went to someone's house, he would disappear into their host library. When they went into town, he would wander off and be found at a bookstore, sitting on the floor in his own world. He was also deeply into comics. The single-minded passion of his superheroes impressed him. They're always trying to save the world with their underpants on the outside of these skin-tight iron suits, which is pretty strange, really, when you think about it, he says. But they are trying to save the world. Musk read both sets of his father's encyclopedias and became to his doting mother and sister a genius boy. To other kids, however, he was an annoying nerd. Look at the moon. It must be 1,000,000 miles away, a cousin once explained. Replied Elon, no, it's like 239,000 miles, depending on the orbit. 239,000 miles. One book that he found in his father's office described great inventions that would be made in the future. I would come back from school and go to the side of my father's office and read it over and over, he says. Among the ideas was a rocket propelled by an ion thruster, which would use particles rather than gas for thrust. Late one night, at the control room of his rocket base in South Texas, Musk described the book at a length to me, including how an ion thruster would work in a vacuum. That book is what first made me think about going to other planets, he said.